Hello, my dear viewers. I wish you pleasant viewing and a wonderful day. I also look forward to your feedback in the comments. When I walked into the towering glass lobby of Weiler and Finch that August morning, freshly minted MBA in hand, I was equal parts terrified and exhilarated. My name is Ellie Moore, and I was 26, armed with a resume packed with credentials and a heart full of ambition. I'd spent 6 years working toward this moment. 2 degrees, 3 internships, and countless sleepless nights had brought me here, to my first real job in the firm's elite marketing division. The work was brutal from day one. I was dropped into the deep end with a minor campaign for a health beverage brand, expected to swim or sink with little guidance. I swam. I learned fast, stayed late, and taught myself everything the onboarding sessions glossed over. By month 3, I was running back-end strategy for 5 active campaigns. I became the reliable one, the one who never missed a deadline, who always had the cleanest data and the clearest action plans. Over time, I stopped noticing the clock. Recognition was slow, but it came in nods during meetings and client emails addressed directly to me. My direct manager, Leanne, was notoriously hard to impress. But during a check-in after I helped a struggling campaign pull a 42% rebound, she gave me a rare smile and said, "You've got potential, Ellie. Keep this up, and I'll be making recommendations soon." That one line fueled me for months. I knew something was happening when I overheard Damien, our department head, talking to Leanne outside the break room. Something about succession planning and leadership transitions. Leanne's voice was muffled, but I caught enough. Ellie's shown real initiative, consistent performance, but what? The rest of the sentence gnawed at me for days. Then came the email, subject line, Department Restructuring Discussion. A meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. No details, just that Damien would be announcing changes. I tried to stay calm. Rationally, I knew I was a contender. My performance reviews were spotless. My name had started appearing in client summaries and monthly recaps. I'd mentored the last 2 interns. I'd even been quietly invited to strategy sessions with the firm's oldest client. Still, nothing was guaranteed, especially not with people like Rachel in the picture. Rachel had joined 6 months after me. Charming, polished, effortless, the kind of woman who could network in her sleep and make it look like art. She rarely stayed past 6 and delegated more than she delivered, but she had a knack for turning casual conversations with upper management into opportunities. She wasn't bad at her job, but she wasn't burning midnight oil over Excel forecasts either. I told myself not to think about her. Not now. I poured myself into work, going over my campaign metrics twice, triple-checking slides for next week's presentation. I even stayed late Thursday night, tweaking our holiday conversion analysis just in case it came up during the restructuring talk. When I left the office that night, it was nearly 10. The building was dark, except for the janitor humming somewhere down the hallway. I stood by the elevator, watching my reflection flicker in the glass. Was it enough? Had I done enough? Friday morning arrived with a knot in my stomach. I dressed carefully, navy blazer, soft blouse, the necklace my mentor had given me when I graduated. I needed to look like the leader I wanted to be. At 9:02 a.m., the entire department gathered in the West Conference Room. Damien stood at the head of the long table, holding a tablet and sipping coffee like it was any other day. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his tone casual. "Today's discussion is about long-term department growth, and a few leadership adjustments we'll be making to align with those goals." My pulse quickened. His eyes scanned the room. "Some of you have stepped up in significant ways this past year. It hasn't gone unnoticed." I felt Leanne glance at me. Just briefly, Damien continued. "One of you will be offered a team lead role next week. This isn't final yet. Evaluations are ongoing. But I wanted to be transparent about where we're heading." My fingers tightened around my notebook. One of us. I didn't look at Rachel, though I could feel her shifting slightly in her seat beside me. I stared at the folder in front of me, filled with reports I had rewritten at midnight, feedback summaries I'd crafted with care. I wasn't certain, but I wanted this, desperately, and I had to believe that counted for something. Mondays were never my favorite, but this one hit differently. The office buzzed with unusual energy, an undercurrent of whispers, darting glances, and the unmistakable scent of something brewing. I was halfway through deciphering campaign feedback notes when a laugh cut through the background hum. Loud, confident, practiced. I looked up. A tall man walked into our wing like he owned it. Broad shoulders, blazer with the sleeves rolled just enough to show off an expensive watch, hair styled with precision. He had the kind of face that belonged in a networking seminar video, smugly attractive, with the kind of confidence that made you wonder if he actually knew anything or just acted like he did. Trailing behind him were Damien, our department head, and one of the upper-level execs I only ever saw during budget reviews. "Team," Damien announced, clapping his hands once. "Meet Brandon Carter. He's joining us as a strategy associate. Comes with experience from Braxton Partners and other circles." He didn't elaborate on what other circles meant, but the way the other manager chuckled said enough. Brandon grinned. "Pleasure. I hear you all are the engine that keeps the machine running. Looking forward to jumping in." He caught my eye as he said that last part and winked. I forced a polite nod. At first, he was all charm and casual arrogance. He'd hover over desks, throwing out suggestions without really listening to what was being said. He asked questions that sounded insightful until you realized they had no substance. In meetings, he'd chime in late with a joke or a broad generalization, and somehow everyone chuckled like he'd delivered a stroke of genius. And me? I stayed in my lane. I had campaigns to optimize, reports to finalize, clients to respond to. I didn't have time to babysit another coasting pretty boy. But Brandon wasn't just another new hire. He was strategic. It started small. He began lingering near my desk during brainstorm sessions, leaning over as if we were in on something together. "How'd you pull those engagement numbers on the Harper campaign?" he asked once. "Impressive stuff." I walked him through the segmentation strategy. He nodded like he understood, but I could tell he didn't follow half of what I said. Still, he thanked me, and a week later, I heard him repeat the same explanation, word for word, in a cross-department huddle. I let it slide. Then it happened again. We were prepping a pitch for a luxury skincare brand. I'd built the entire consumer journey map from scratch, layering psychological triggers with behavioral analytics. I stayed late, missed dinner, even came in on Sunday to finish the creative prototype. Monday morning, I found Brandon standing at the whiteboard, presenting my strategy in a casual discussion with Damien and two executives. The words were mine. The flow was mine. Even the metaphors I'd jotted down in my notebook were tumbling out of his mouth with perfect ease. I waited for him to acknowledge my contribution. He didn't. Afterward, I cornered him near the elevators. "Why did you present my skincare strategy?" I asked, not bothering to soften the edge in my voice. Brandon didn't flinch. "Relax, Ellie. We're on the same team. It was just an informal discussion." "Informal discussions don't usually involve two VPs. He smiled, smooth as butter. "I just summarized what you already had. You said it yourself last week. It's all about how you frame the story. You nailed the core ideas, and I gave it the polish." I was too stunned to respond. That week, I started documenting everything. File histories, timestamps, email chains. Proof that I had created every deliverable he'd so effortlessly slid under his own name. Not because I planned to use it, not yet, but because I knew how this game worked, and I could feel the rules tilting. Brandon didn't slow down. If anything, he grew bolder. He began volunteering to present team progress, especially on projects I led. I'd open a file one morning to find it suddenly updated by him. A few visuals tweaked, a couple of bullet points moved around, just enough to add his name to the metadata. When I brought it up to Leanne, she exhaled through her nose like she'd been expecting the conversation. "Look, she said, closing the door to her office. Brandon has connections. He's visible. He knows how to work a room. So, charisma outweighs work ethic now? Ellie, don't be naive. Her voice was soft, not unkind. You do brilliant work. I've told Damien that repeatedly. But Brandon? He plays the game differently. And sometimes, unfortunately, the game matters. I left her office feeling cold. The worst part wasn't the theft. It wasn't even the indifference. It was the quiet shift I saw in people's eyes when Brandon walked into a meeting. They turned toward him now. They laughed at his jokes. They nodded when he talked, whether or not he said anything worth hearing. I was becoming invisible in a room where I'd once had a voice. Still, I didn't give up. I kept doing the work. I refined campaigns. I coached the interns. I stayed focused, hoping results would speak louder than polish. Until one morning, I passed by the break room and heard Brandon laughing with Damien. Leadership material, right? He said. I've already got some ideas for how we can restructure the junior team. Damien chuckled. We'll talk more about that next week. I paused outside the door, invisible again. Something shifted in me then. Not rage, resolve. I went back to my desk and opened a new document. Not a campaign, not a strategy, a log. I titled it, The Shadow. Because if Brandon thought he could steal my work and wear it like a second skin, he was going to find out what happens when the shadow steps into the light. There's a particular moment in every office environment when you feel the air shift. Not because someone says something, but because someone is suddenly somewhere they weren't before. That moment happened 3 weeks after Brandon joined. I was grabbing a report from the communal printer when I passed Damien's office and saw Brandon inside. The door was half closed, not quite private, but just enough to signal exclusion. Damien was laughing, really laughing, the kind of deep-chested chuckle I'd only heard once or twice in all my months at Weiler. Brandon sat casually on the edge of Damien's desk, gesturing animatedly like they were old friends catching up. I paused. No one else had ever sat on Damien's desk, not even Leanne. Later that week, Brandon was in the Monday metrics meeting, sitting beside Damien instead of the usual analyst spot near the back. When I began presenting my Q1 forecast analysis, Brandon jumped in before I'd finished my first chart. Ellie's segmentation model is solid, he said, like a gracious host introducing a performer. But I think we can enhance it by tying it to behavioral archetypes, like we discussed last week, Dee. I blinked. That wasn't part of the original framework. Sure, Brandon said with a smile. But with a little cross-pollination, it could be. I'll circle back and build it out with Ellie. Damien nodded. I like that. Make it collaborative. Collaborative. The word settled in my gut like a rock. My work was being recast as a group project. It didn't stop there. Brandon began inserting himself into every campaign I was managing. If I was leading a kickoff call, Brandon was suddenly CC'd just to stay in the loop. If I uploaded a draft pitch deck to the shared drive, I'd find a revised version 24 hours later with half the text rewritten and Brandon's initials stamped in the metadata. Sometimes he added things that made no sense, vague strategy buzzwords, slick-looking graphics that didn't align with the brand guidelines. But Damien praised the energy and big-picture thinking. One afternoon, I returned from a client lunch to find Brandon in a meeting room with 2 interns and a creative lead. They were reviewing a concept storyboard I had designed the night before. It was my storyboard, my campaign vision, but Brandon was presenting it. I want this to feel bold, he said, sweeping his hand across the monitor. When I first developed this flow, I imagined the user's journey like an emotional curve: anticipation, satisfaction, re-engagement. He didn't look at me when I stepped in, but one of the interns did. Carla, who had shadowed me for 2 weeks. Her eyes widened. She knew. I didn't confront him. Not in front of others. I simply took back the room under the guise of joining the session and began asking pointed questions about the logic behind the flow. Brandon stumbled, pivoted, deflected. By the end, it was obvious he didn't understand half of what he was presenting. But still, he grinned, clapped me on the shoulder, and said, "Great teamwork, Elle." It was always Elle now, as if shortening my name gave him permission to shorten my boundaries. I started keeping a folder on my personal drive. Every project I led had a mirror file. Notes, outlines, raw drafts. Dated, tracked, backed up. I wasn't just creating campaigns anymore. I was building a defense. Because Brandon was clever. He didn't steal directly. He borrowed. He collaborated. He stepped in when needed. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to blur the lines between his contributions and mine. It wasn't just that he was close to Damien now. It was how natural it looked. They shared inside jokes. Brandon started calling him D. He made remarks during meetings about higher-level strategy, even hinting once that he was excited about the next quarter's leadership realignments. I stayed quiet, but I watched. Watched how my ideas walked into meetings on his tongue. Watched how he took credit without ever saying the words, "I did this." He didn't need to. The room had started to believe it. One night, as I was finishing up a report, Leanne stopped by my desk. She glanced at the monitor. "Working on the Griffin campaign analysis?" I nodded. Her brow furrowed. "Brandon mentioned he'd finished that yesterday." I turned my screen toward her. Data models, summary tables, conversion metrics. "He didn't." She stared for a moment. Then she sighed. "I know what's happening, Ellie. I do." "Then why let it happen?" "Because he's not playing by your rules," she said softly. "He's playing by theirs." That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing Brandon's voice echo in my head, playing my words like instruments in his orchestra. And I realized I wasn't just fighting for recognition anymore. I was fighting to keep my own work from being erased. I woke before my alarm. Not out of nervousness, at least that's what I told myself, but from the kind of alert tension that settles when something important is about to shift. I had gone over every scenario the night before, trying not to get my hopes up, but the truth was, they already were. Everyone's were. The promotion announcement was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the West Conference Room. We'd all received the calendar invite titled Department Realignment, Strategic Leadership Update. It didn't say my name, but it didn't have to. People whispered about it all week. Taylor from Creative told me she'd already called it in her team group chat. Carla, one of the interns I'd mentored, gave me a hopeful thumbs up as I passed her desk that morning. Even Leanne had said, just yesterday, "Wear something nice tomorrow, Ellie. Not that you don't always look sharp, but..." Still. I had stayed late every night that week, finishing up the final phase of the Griffin campaign, double-checking our outreach projections. I didn't know for sure what Damien would say, but I had let myself believe. I'd earned this. At 9:58 a.m., I walked into the conference room to find almost everyone already seated. I took my usual place, front left, second chair from the end, and opened my notebook. My palms were slightly damp, but I kept my expression calm, professional. Damien stood at the head of the table, flanked by Leanne and another exec from HR. His usual tablet rested in his hand. He gave a tight smile, the kind he used when he thought he was about to say something inspiring. Then I noticed Brandon. He was standing next to Damien, not seated with the rest of us. His arms were folded casually, that same annoyingly perfect smile fixed on his face. He wore a sharp navy suit I'd never seen him wear before. His hair was freshly styled, and he looked comfortable. Too comfortable. My stomach tightened, but I didn't let the thought form fully. Damien cleared his throat. "Thanks for joining on short notice. As many of you know, we've been assessing team leadership needs as we scale into next quarter. We've had incredible performance across several divisions, some standout work, truly. And I want to acknowledge that before we get to the main point of today's meeting." He paused, looked at Brandon, and then looked at the rest of us. After much consideration, I'm excited to announce that Brandon Carter will be stepping into the role of team lead, digital strategy effective immediately. The words didn't register. Not at first. I heard them, but they hung there, disconnected from meaning, like they were said in another language, in another room, to someone else. It was only when Brandon stepped forward, shook Damien's hand, and turned to face the room that the meaning began to slam down on me, inch by inch. Applause rippled through the room, thin and scattered at first, then more enthusiastic as people realized this was the moment. The moment I was supposed to be standing there. The moment I had prepared for, worked for. The moment that now belonged to someone else. Someone who hadn't earned it. Someone who had barely been here 3 months. Someone who had used my work to climb. Brandon was already speaking. Thanks so much, Dee. And to everyone. It's been a whirlwind joining this team, but I've felt at home since day one. I'm humbled by the trust, and I can't wait to bring a fresh perspective to the incredible momentum we've built. I didn't move. I couldn't. I sat still, frozen, my eyes on the notepad in front of me as my heart pounded in my ears. I felt heat rising in my neck, but I forced my expression to remain neutral. Normal. Do not react, Ellie. Do not give them anything. Brandon kept going, name-dropping campaigns he'd barely touched, tossing vague references to data-led innovation and strategic growth narratives. Every second felt like salt pressed into an open wound. And the worst part? No one seemed surprised. No one except me. When the meeting ended, people filed out slowly, murmuring soft congratulations and stealing cautious glances at me when they thought I wasn't looking. Leanne avoided my eyes. That hurt more than I expected. Brandon approached my seat with that same blinding grin. Hey, he said. Crazy, right? But I guess things work out. I looked at him, really looked, and something inside me, something I hadn't felt in a long time, went still. Cold, precise. I didn't speak. I just nodded once, closed my notebook, and walked out. I didn't go back to my desk. Instead, I walked down the hall, past the break room, past the bathrooms, into the small conference room no one used after 11 xiao. I sat at the long table, opened my laptop, and clicked on the document I had written 2 weeks earlier, just in case. My resignation letter. I hadn't finished it. I hadn't even signed it. But now I typed the final line. I added one sentence. The one that would make Damien's face fall. The one that would remind Brandon exactly whose work built the foundation he stood on. Then I saved the document, attached it to an email, and sat back in the chair, letting the silence sink in. I wasn't done yet, but I had just made my first move. When Brandon was announced as team lead, something in the air shifted. Not like a gust of wind, but something quieter, like pressure building in the walls of a dam. You couldn't see it, not right away. But those of us who'd been there long enough could feel it, pressing against everything we'd built. And it didn't take long for the cracks to appear. Brandon wasn't interested in building systems. He was interested in appearances. He didn't walk into his new role with a vision. He walked in with a checklist. Make noise, take space, take credit. The first week after his appointment, I told myself it would be fine, that I'd find a way to navigate it, that my work would continue to speak for itself. But Brandon wasn't just loud. He was calculated. On Monday, he assigned me to assist with the Chroma Beauty campaign refresh. I had already scoped the data weeks ago, mapped the customer journey, and drafted a bold repositioning strategy that linked user behavior patterns with emotional marketing arcs. Just need you to put together a few slides, he said, breezing past my desk like I was the office printer. High-level stuff, bullet points, charts. You're the numbers whisperer. I almost laughed. I wasn't the whisperer, I was the architect. Still, I did it, out of duty, out of habit, out of the lingering hope that maybe he'd credit me. He didn't. He presented the entire thing at the executive sync on Thursday without a single mention of my name. He called it a new perspective he'd been incubating since his Braxton days. Braxton. He used that name like a brand, one that implied pedigree. Strategy pedigree, corporate pedigree. The kind of pedigree that got you a promotion after 3 months of recycling other people's ideas. After the presentation, Leanne caught up to me near the elevators. "Why didn't you speak up?" she asked gently. "That strategy was yours." I looked at her, and for a moment I felt exposed. "What would have been the point?" Leanne hesitated. "He's complicated." "That's one word for it," I muttered. Over the next 2 weeks, it escalated. Brandon started setting up brief check-ins that weren't check-ins at all. They were task dumps. "L, could you do the client segmentation for Luxure?" "L, we need conversion metrics on that hair care funnel by Tuesday." "L, do you have time to reformat the Pendry deck? I've got a meeting with them Thursday." Not we. Not can we work together. Just you do it, I'll present it. At first, I pushed back gently. "I'm already managing the Griffin analytics. I can't pivot to Pendry by Thursday." "You're fast. You'll manage," he said with that same condescending grin. "Besides, you're brilliant at pulling insights out of thin air. I'll owe you one." But he never owed anyone anything. That week, I worked 3 12-hour days, rewriting decks, cross-referencing customer surveys, scrubbing social listening data for Pendry's rebrand. Brandon took it all and delivered a brilliant, forward-thinking pitch that left the Pendry execs nodding like he'd just invented customer psychology. I watched on the call as he clicked through my slides, pausing in all the right places, his tone practiced, smooth. His background was perfectly lit, his jawline sharper than his ethics. When one of the Pendry VPs asked about the data behind the customer clusters, Brandon smiled. "We developed that framework based on internal behavior archetypes and real-time engagement heuristics." We. Again. After the call, I stayed in the conference room alone. I stared at my reflection in the dark monitor screen. My own face looked tired. Not from work. Work I could handle. It was the invisibility that weighed on me. The way my hands shaped everything, while someone else wore it like a tailored suit. It wasn't just him. It was the system that rewarded it. And I was done pretending otherwise. I started a new folder in my personal drive. Replica. Inside, I began storing copies of everything. Every draft, every analysis, every email I sent that later became part of Brandon's vision. I uploaded timestamps, Slack threads, raw data queries, every version of every file. I also began recording brief memos to myself, voice notes after meetings, observations of conversations, exact quotes. It felt paranoid at first, but also empowering. Like stacking bricks in a wall, only I knew I was building. And Brandon? He just kept climbing. He was invited to strategy lunches with Damien, sat in on calls with clients I had managed for over a year. Once, I found a printed version of my long-form campaign theory paper on his desk, with the title rewritten in a different font and my name removed from the footer. He saw me standing there and said, "Hope you don't mind. I borrowed some of your notes. Gold stuff. I just streamlined it for exec readability." I didn't respond. Not then. I just smiled and walked away. That evening, Carla, the intern, sent me a message. "Hey, I noticed something weird. Brandon showed me a draft of the Chroma pitch today and said it was his concept. But I remember you talking about it last month. I have our notes from that day, if you ever need them." I stared at the screen, then typed back, "Keep those notes safe." I might, because something was coming. He didn't know it yet, but the strings he was pulling were tangled around his own feet. And I was done dancing. I began waking up with my jaw clenched. Even in sleep, I wasn't at peace anymore. I'd wake in the dark, heart pounding, unsure if I was late to a meeting or if I had forgotten to upload the latest data pack Brandon would undoubtedly need for optics. My alarm was set for 6 quake, but by 4:42, I was already staring at the ceiling, mind spinning through tasks I hadn't yet completed, and tasks that had already been taken from me. At work, I functioned like a machine. Click, analyze, build, share, click again. At home, I became a shadow of myself. Connor, my boyfriend of nearly 2 years, noticed long before I admitted it. He used to greet me at the door when I came home. Now, I came in so late that he had stopped waiting up. I'd find him on the couch with his laptop, half asleep, or already in bed. One evening, I collapsed onto the living room armchair without a word and immediately opened my laptop again. I was revising the Chroma follow-up deck because Brandon wanted one final tweak to the flow. Nothing major, just tighten it up before I show the CMO tomorrow. I hadn't eaten since breakfast. I hadn't blinked properly in 10 minutes. Connor looked up from his spot on the couch. "You're not going to eat?" "I will," I mumbled. "Just need to finish this." "You said that last night." I kept typing. "You also said it the night before." My hands stilled. He closed his own laptop and sat up. "Ellie, I'm not trying to start a fight, but you're not here anymore. Not really. I talk, and I'm not sure if you're listening. You fall asleep holding your phone. You wake up already checking your email. This isn't just burnout. This is disappearing." "I'm fine," I said too quickly, too defensively. He leaned forward. "No, you're not. And I'm saying this because I love you. But I feel like I'm watching you dissolve, piece by piece, and you're letting it happen." That stopped me. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. I looked at him and realized I couldn't remember the last real conversation we'd had. The last time I'd asked about his day, his work, his life outside of my collapsing world. "I'm sorry," I whispered, but the words felt too small. Connor sighed. "I know you're under pressure. I know what this job means to you. But it's not supposed to own you, Ellie. It's not supposed to cost you everything." He stood, grabbed his phone and keys. "I'm going out. You need space? Fine. But when you're ready to come back, not just here, but to us, you're going to have to decide what's worth saving." The door closed behind him, and the silence that followed was deafening. I sat frozen for a full minute, the cursor on my screen blinking like a pulse. In that moment, I realized something deeply uncomfortable. I was chasing a job that had already shown me my worth meant nothing to them. I was breaking myself open for people who took and took and took, while pretending it was praise. Brandon didn't just exploit me professionally, he had infected my life. Because now, even when I closed my eyes, I saw his face, heard his voice, replaying my ideas, my strategies, on stages I had built but would never stand on. I thought about the version of myself from 2 years ago, bright-eyed, fresh out of grad school, full of ambition. That girl had believed that if you worked hard, kept your head down, and delivered results, the world would notice. She was gone now. What remained was someone barely holding it together, sacrificing sleep, health, relationships, for a seat that was never going to be given. Later that night, I tried to go to bed. I turned off the light, closed the laptop, forced myself to lie still in the dark. But sleep didn't come. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, listening to the silence of my apartment, and wondering how long I could keep lying to myself about where this was heading. Because something had cracked, not just inside me, but around me. And once a crack starts, the only thing left is the collapse. Or the escape. There's a point you hit where numbness becomes your baseline. You stop expecting fairness. You stop hoping someone will speak up. You just keep moving, one spreadsheet, one campaign, one stolen credit at a time. Because stopping means having to feel everything you've buried. That's where I was the morning of the Sorella pitch. It was our biggest client-facing presentation of the quarter. Their rebranding initiative was high stakes, high visibility, and had Damien's name all over it. Everyone in the department knew it was my project. I had led the brief, built the concept, conducted the consumer research, and developed the full campaign framework down to the font guidelines. Brandon hadn't lifted a finger. Every time I tried to loop him in, he brushed it off. "You've got this," he'd say with that stupid grin. "You're the wizard with numbers and nuance. Just lay the groundwork. I'll bring the sparkle." I wanted to scream every time he said that, but I kept quiet. I documented everything, saved every draft, every email, every time-stamped edit. By Wednesday night, I had prepared the full deck, ready for review. Brandon glanced at it once, nodded, and said, "Looks clean. I'll punch it up with some flair before the pitch." He didn't. Instead, Thursday morning, I arrived at the summit and found my name missing from the agenda. Under the Sorella presentation slot, it read, "Presenter, Brandon Carter, Team Lead, Digital Strategy." I stared at it, willing it to change. He hadn't said a word to me. I took a seat near the back of the auditorium, gripping the armrests like a lifeline. Then he took the stage. There he was, wearing the jacket he reserved for important meetings, standing under the lights, exuding fake humility as he opened with a joke that got a soft chuckle from the room. Then he said the words that would snap the last fiber of my restraint. "I'm excited to share a strategy I've been developing for Sorella over the past few weeks." No mention of me. Not even a nod. And then, slide by slide, he presented my work. Every page had been reformatted, slightly tweaked to look like his style. Flashier transitions, more buzzwords. But the core, the strategy, the story, all mine. He walked them through my concept of emotional resonance mapping, rebranded as affinity anchoring. He presented the engagement arcs I had modeled using Gen Z behavioral data. He even read the quote I had typed into the closing slide the night before. "Brands don't sell products anymore. They sell identity. They sell belonging." My words. My voice. Wearing his suit. The room applauded at the end. Someone from the client's executive team asked for a follow-up call to expand the framework. Brandon thanked them with a modest laugh. "That's the beauty of a solid vision," he said. "You build a campaign that lives beyond the pitch." When he stepped off stage, people congratulated him, complimented his original approach, asked if he'd be leading future summits. He smiled, gracious and smug. I didn't say a word. I didn't move. Not even when Damien patted him on the back and said, "That's what leadership looks like." The rage came later. After the summit wrapped, I walked down the corridor toward the lounge to grab some air. That's when I heard his voice. Brandon, leaning against the wall near the catering station, talking to someone I didn't recognize. Another executive from upper management. "Ellie, she's great for back-end support," he was saying. "But big picture thinking? It's not her strength. She needs a lot of direction." He laughed lightly. "Between you and me, she's got a little analysis paralysis. Smart as hell, but too rigid. That's why I've been handling the vision side. Just makes everything smoother." My hands curled into fists. I stood around the corner, back pressed to the wall, heart pounding in my chest. Not out of surprise, but out of the sheer audacity. He wasn't just erasing me now. He was painting me as incompetent. After everything I'd built, after every silent sacrifice, every late night, every idea he'd stolen and stitched into his Frankenstein portfolio, now he was laying the groundwork to discredit me altogether. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just decided. There, in the hallway, as he laughed and nodded and charmed his way into another conversation, I made the quietest, clearest decision of my life. It was over. I walked back to the office. I didn't go to my desk. I went straight to the printer and pulled up the file I'd saved weeks ago, hidden in a folder labeled Private Admin, the resignation letter. I reread it. It was professional, respectful, too respectful. So I added one final line. Then I printed it, signed it, slipped it into an envelope. The weight of it was nothing, but it felt like shedding a mountain. I tucked it into my purse, and I waited for the right moment, because it was coming, soon. And when it did, Brandon wouldn't be smiling. I didn't deliver the resignation letter that Friday. I stared at it for hours, fingers hovering above the keyboard, the final line still echoing in the back of my mind. The one I knew would change everything. I could see it so clearly. Damien's eyes narrowing, Brandon's smugness dissolving like sugar in boiling water. But I didn't press send, because walking away empty-handed wasn't enough. I needed to walk away remembered. And that meant preparation, not an explosion. So I started quietly, meticulously, strategically. Every morning, before opening my inbox, I backed up files. Every meeting, I recorded detailed notes, not just my contributions, but Brandon's edits, omissions, deflections. I scoured old Slack channels and email threads, collecting patterns like a forensic analyst. Each time Brandon reworded my strategy and slapped his name on it, I copied the original and saved both versions side by side. Every "great work, Ellie" from a coworker that somehow didn't make it into the final project email? Screenshot. Every instance of "I'll review later" from Brandon before he presented the untouched deck as his own? Screenshot. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it all, but I knew one thing. I wasn't leaving without a record. And then, one night, when I couldn't sleep again, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to quit, I was going to build. I started with a notebook. Not my work notebook, not the bullet journal I used for task lists. A fresh one. The kind I hadn't touched since grad school, when ideas had felt infinite and failure was just a step on the road to something great. On the first page, I wrote, "No more asking for permission." And underneath that, what would my own business look like? At first, the question scared me. I'd spent so long being molded into what someone else needed. Brandon needed a ghostwriter. Damien needed a box-checking overachiever. The company needed a tireless workhorse. What did I need? I stayed up until 3 a.m. that night. Not because I was haunted, but because, for the first time in months, I was dreaming. Big. I mapped out a consultancy, small, nimble, grounded in real strategy. No fluff, no jargon. Just data-backed marketing that centered integrity over hype. The opposite of everything I'd seen Weiler become under Brandon's direction. I created 3 core service packages, listed ideal client types, jotted down people I'd worked with who'd trusted me, even when Brandon was technically their point of contact. I named the folder Blueprint, and every night after work, I built it piece by piece. During the day, I was still Ellie the Reliable. I took meetings, drafted briefs, smiled politely when Brandon asked me to pull something together real quick. But beneath the surface, I was moving. By the end of the week, I had registered a domain, reserved the name Kindling Strategy, because I wanted to work with brands that sparked something real, built a prototype site on a blank Squarespace page, ordered a P.O. box, and created a business email, crafted an origin story that made it clear who I was, and why I'd never let someone take my name again. I didn't tell a soul, not even Connor. We were still quiet around each other, navigating that awkward, fragile space where love hadn't died, but it had stopped speaking up. He knew something was different, though. One evening, as I closed my laptop, he looked up from the kitchen and asked, "You okay?" I nodded. "Actually, yeah. For the first time in a long time, I think I am." He didn't push. He just watched me with a kind of cautious hope, like he didn't want to say the wrong thing. Later that night, I left my laptop on the coffee table, open to my draft homepage. When he walked past and saw it, he paused. "This yours?" I nodded again. He studied the screen. "Kindling Strategy," he read aloud. "That's a good name." He didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask about Brandon, or Damien, or the hell I'd been living in for the past year. He just said one thing. "I'm proud of you." And for the first time in months, I felt it. Not just in my head, but in my bones. I didn't need to be chosen anymore. I was choosing myself. Over the next few days, I kept building quietly. I began writing a short manifesto for my brand, drafted templates for client onboarding, created a pricing matrix. Every minute I spent working on it felt like a small act of rebellion. No one at Wylar knew. Brandon still popped over my desk with fake urgency and vague praise, asking for another one of your magic decks. Damien still smiled that bland, empty smile during meetings, acting like leadership was about knowing the right buzzword instead of backing the right people. But they couldn't touch me anymore, because I was already gone. I just hadn't told them yet. And when I did, they'd feel it. It was still raining when I arrived at the office. The city outside looked like it was holding its breath. Gray skies, slick sidewalks, people tucked into coats and umbrellas. A fitting backdrop, a kind of hush before a storm I had spent months preparing. I stepped into the lobby at 7:41 a.m., earlier than usual. The office was quiet. Just the hum of the vending machines and the low murmur of the heating system coming to life. No Brandon, no Damien. Not yet. Perfect. I walked straight to my desk, sat down, and opened my laptop like it was any other day. Like I wasn't about to unravel a lie that had wrapped itself around my entire career. There was no hesitation this time, no inner debate, no shaky hands, just focus. I clicked open the folder I had named Final Flame. Inside were the two documents that would change everything. Resignation letter, Eleanor T. Hale.pdf. Attribution, evidence, E. Shale, V. B. Carter. Zip. The letter was firm but professional. I'd rewritten it dozens of times, always unsure whether to burn bridges or simply walk away from them. But in the end, I realized I wasn't burning anything. I was lighting a flare. The evidence file was 147 inabos and meticulously organized. It contained time-stamped campaign decks showing my name removed from final versions, Slack threads where Brandon asked vague questions before taking my full drafts, metadata showing who created and edited strategy documents, side-by-side presentation slides with my original phrasing and Brandon's stolen versions, a transcript of the Sorella pitch with timestamps from the summit recording, a written statement from Carla, the intern, who had witnessed Brandon claiming my work, audio recordings of 2 separate hallway conversations where Brandon discredited me to executives. I'd built it carefully, silently, day by day. Like a woman stacking kindling under a house she didn't plan to live in anymore. Now it was time to strike the match. I opened a new email and addressed it to Damian Roth, VP of Marketing, Leanne Price, Mentor and Senior Manager, HR Director, HR Compliance Team. I gave the subject line exactly the weight it deserved. Formal resignation and accompanying documentation of attribution misconduct. The message itself was short. Dear Damien, Leanne, and HR, please find attached my official resignation, effective immediately. Also attached is a collection of documents detailing the consistent and systemic misattribution of my work by Brandon Carter during his tenure as team lead. These materials outline a pattern of unethical conduct, including intellectual theft, misrepresentation, and professional defamation. I hope this documentation offers a clearer view into the culture that has developed under current leadership. For what it's worth, I believed in this company once. You'll find my final thoughts at the end of my resignation letter. Regards, Ellie Hale. I attached the files. I hit send. There was no immediate noise, just the soft whoosh of the email leaving my outbox. The silence that followed was both unreal and perfect. I stood slowly, pulling a crisp manila envelope from my tote bag. The printed copy of the letter, folded perfectly, sealed. I had handwritten the name on the front in clean black ink. Damian Roth. I walked the long hallway to his corner office, heels clicking against the polished floor like a countdown. His door was ajar. He was standing by the window, talking on his Bluetooth headset and sipping coffee like nothing was about to change. I stepped inside. He turned mid-sentence, surprised. Ellie? I didn't answer. I placed the envelope gently on his desk. His brow furrowed as he ended the call. What's this? He picked it up, sliding a finger under the seal. His expression stayed neutral, until it didn't. His eyes moved over the first few paragraphs casually, then slowed, then stopped. He looked up. His face had changed. Is this, is this some kind of joke? I met his gaze. No, it's exactly what it says. Before he could say anything else, his computer pinged. Then again. Then again. I knew what it was. The email. The files. The truth. Outside, I heard the low hum of notifications rippling across the office. One by one. Desks turning quiet. Slack channels going still. And then, Ellie! I turned to see Brandon, storming toward me. His voice was too loud for the open floor, but he didn't seem to care. What the hell did you just send? The fake calm he wore like cologne was gone. He looked wild, rattled. His suit jacket was slightly off-center, his shirt wrinkled near the collar, like he'd dressed too fast. You sent what to HR? To Damien? Are you insane? I didn't flinch. I stood in the middle of the office, surrounded by people who had watched me fade into the background for months. Watched Brandon rise on my shoulders. And now they watched something else. A woman taking back her voice. I looked him dead in the eye. I sent the truth. His mouth opened, then closed. He glanced toward Damien, who was now staring at his monitor. Lips parted, pale. You're ruining your reputation, Brandon hissed. You think people are going to hire someone who nukes their team on the way out? I smiled. No. I think they'll hire the woman who finally said no. And then I picked up my bag, walked past the marketing wall that still had Brandon's name on top of the Q3 Wins poster, words I had written, past the desks where people were whispering now, and out the door. The rain had stopped, the sky had cleared, and for the first time in months, I wasn't walking away from something broken. I was walking towards something mine. The morning after I left Weiler, I woke up before my alarm, heart racing like I was already late for a meeting. But there was no meeting, no unread emails, no Brandon hovering with a fake smile, no Damien pretending not to see. Just the hum of our old fridge, the soft creak of the window letting in morning light. And me. I sat up in bed slowly, blinking at the ceiling. My body was still buzzing, as if it hadn't caught up with the fact that the war was over. And I'd won. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, holding a match, with nothing but fog below. That morning, I didn't check email. I didn't scroll LinkedIn. I didn't even glance at my phone. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. My own laptop, untouched by Weiler software, free from company VPNs and tracking. And I stared at the homepage for Kindling Strategy. I had registered the domain a month ago, back when the idea was still just an ember, something private and fragile. But now it was real. I clicked through the bare-bones pages. About, services, blog. Each section half filled with placeholder text and scribbled notes. I felt small. I felt stupid. I felt free. Connor joined me an hour later, mug in hand, hair a mess, his t-shirt inside out. You look like someone who just pulled off a heist, he said. Maybe I did, I whispered, staring at the screen. Terrified? Completely, he grinned. Good, that means you're not lying to yourself. That day, I didn't look for jobs. I built. I rewrote my About page 3 times, trying to strike the right balance between confident and human. I uploaded 3 case studies, stripped of client names, but rich in data, insight, and voice. My voice. The one I hadn't been allowed to use for months. I created a form for inquiries, connected my Gmail, wrote a short blog post titled, On Building from Ash. It was raw, not polished, but honest. I hit publish before I could talk myself out of it. The next day, I got an email. Just one. From someone I hadn't spoken to since my second year at Weiler. Ellie, I just read your post. I left Weiler 6 months ago for similar reasons. I always knew the work was yours. Would love to talk, I replied. We scheduled a call. It led to my first paid project. Not a massive account. Just a small wellness startup run by 2 sisters who were trying to rebrand for a younger audience. But they were kind, direct. They listened. They asked smart questions. They didn't flinch when I told them my rate. They said, "We've seen your work. It speaks for itself." The second client came through word of mouth. The third came through LinkedIn. The fourth found me via my blog. By the end of my second month in business, I had 5 clients, small but steady. They paid on time. They respected boundaries. They trusted me not because I had a fancy title, but because I knew what I was doing. And for the first time in years, I was sleeping again. Really sleeping. Connor noticed the change before I did. "You're different," he said one evening as we stood side by side at the stove, cooking pasta. "Different how?" "Lighter. Like you're not bracing for something all the time." I smiled. Maybe I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. And now I've walked away from the damn closet. He laughed. But it was true. The fear never disappeared completely. It came in waves. When a client paused a project, when my calendar had blank spots, when I dared to imagine hiring someone. But now, the fear didn't own me. I used it. I let it sharpen me. One night, as I was organizing my client folders, I came across the old Final Flame archive, the one I'd sent to HR. I stared at the folder icon for a long moment. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. That version of me, the one who spent her nights gathering receipts in the dark, she had gotten me here. She had fought tooth and nail to be seen. Now it was my turn to lead. At the end of my 3rd month, I hired a part-time designer. At the end of my 6th, I signed a retainer contract that would cover rent for a year. At the end of my 9th, I spoke at a Women in Business panel about ethical branding and surviving toxic leadership. And a year to the day after I walked out of Weiler's glass doors, I stood in my new office, a small, sun-drenched studio with plants in every corner and a hand-lettered sign on the wall that read, "You were never too much. They were just too small." I didn't make millions. I didn't go viral. But I never had to erase my name again. I never had to shrink. And every project, every invoice, every late-night brainstorm reminded me, this isn't revenge, this is freedom, and it's mine. I was in the middle of a brainstorming session when the past came knocking. Our office, my office, buzzed with energy. Sunlight streamed through the oversized windows of the renovated studio space we now called home, casting long shadows across whiteboards scribbled with keywords, audience personas, and campaign arcs. Maya was sketching out a visual storytelling flow for a sustainable fashion client on one board. Arjun and Grace were cross-checking TikTok engagement data on the wall-mounted screen. Everyone was talking over each other, tossing out ideas, laughing, debating fonts and hooks and voice. And I was right in the middle of it, leading, not waiting for permission, not being overlooked, leading. My phone buzzed twice, face down on the table. A third time. I reached for it instinctively, half thinking it was a client ping or a Slack reminder. But when I glanced at the screen, my stomach didn't drop. It twisted. From Damian Roth. Subject: a conversation? I blinked. "Everything good?" Maya asked, sensing the shift in my expression. I nodded slowly. Old world trying to make contact. I let the email sit unopened until after the meeting. I led the team through the final direction. We assigned action items, and everyone filtered out to get lunch or plug into their headphones. Then I shut my door and opened the message. "Hi, Ellie. I hope this finds you well. I wanted to reach out personally. There's been a lot of reflection and internal change at Weiler this past year, and I'd be remiss not to say what should have been said a long time ago. We mishandled everything. Your contributions were overlooked. Your leadership wasn't just undervalued. It was buried. I take responsibility for that. We've made some significant changes. Brandon is no longer with the company. Several internal structures have been revised. That said, we'd love to talk to you about returning, this time in a role that reflects your actual capabilities. Director of Strategy, reporting directly to executive leadership. Full autonomy to build your own team, drive initiatives, shape culture. If you're open to a conversation, I'd appreciate the chance to talk." Damien, I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I was tempted, because I wasn't. A year ago, I might have clung to an email like this, like a life raft. I might have reread it a dozen times, searching for sincerity, planning how to negotiate it. Now, now I felt nothing but clarity. It wasn't anger, it wasn't bitterness, it was freedom. I stood up and looked around the office, the place I had built from scratch, from ash. From every long night, they told me I was too sensitive, too intense, too quiet to lead. We had a team of 9 now, diverse, sharp, empathetic, funny, people who checked each other's blind spots, who worked hard and respected the hours, who credited each other by name, in front of clients, always. Our walls were covered in sticky notes, not egos. We had clients across 3 continents. We'd just signed a year-long retainer with a global health tech brand. We had our first intern cohort launching next month. We had culture, we had values, we had me, and I wasn't about to go backward. Still, I crafted my reply carefully. I wanted it to land like a stone in water, quiet, firm, and undeniable. Hi, Damien, thank you for your message. I'm glad to hear Weiler is reevaluating its culture and leadership structures. I truly hope that continues. That said, I've built something I believe in, something that values transparency, originality, and people before profit. I'm not interested in returning. What I am interested in is continuing to grow something that never required me to beg for credit. Best of luck. Ellie Hale, founder and CEO. Kindling strategy, I sent it and closed the laptop. The next morning, I got a message from someone else. Kendra, one of the junior strategists from Weilar. We had only worked together briefly, but she had always been sharp and kind. Hey Ellie, I saw your website. It's stunning. I've been thinking about leaving Weiler. Would you have time for a coffee sometime? I want to do things differently too. I smiled. She wasn't the first to reach out. Over the past few months, my inbox had started filling with quiet questions from former colleagues, acquaintances, even competitors. How did you start? How did you know you were ready? How do you build something that doesn't hollow you out? I answered every single one. Sometimes I offered advice, sometimes I just listened, and sometimes I hired them. By the end of the year, Kindling had doubled its team. Not because we scaled fast, but because we scaled right. No one here was invisible. No one here needed to tape their name back onto their work. And me? I no longer dreamt about proving myself. I no longer ached for recognition. Because every time I signed a strategy document, every time a client said, "This is exactly what we needed," every time I heard a young woman on my team speak with confidence I didn't have at her age, I knew I was the recognition. And I wasn't going anywhere. It had been over 2 years since I walked out of Weiler's glass doors, with my resignation letter still warm in Damien's hand. 2 years since I stopped asking for credit and started claiming space. 2 years of building something I once thought I'd never be allowed to have. A business that matched my values, a team that felt like home, and a voice that no longer had to fight to be heard. So when I saw him again, when I saw Brandon, I didn't freeze. I didn't flare with rage. I didn't feel a flicker of revenge. I felt nothing. And in that stillness, I realized I had truly moved on. It happened on an overcast Friday morning at a cafe downtown, one of those industrial chic spots with exposed brick, eucalyptus hanging from the ceiling, and oat milk everything. I'd just wrapped a Zoom strategy call with our new Australian client and had ducked out for coffee and a breather before our investor meeting. I had just stepped inside, scrolling through notes on my phone, when I heard the barista say a name behind me. Brandon? I turned instinctively. He looked up from the pastry case, and time didn't stop. It just shifted. His posture was different now, shoulders hunched slightly forward. His button-up shirt was wrinkled at the collar, and the sharpness he used to carry like a shield had dulled. His skin looked tired, his jaw tense in a way that had nothing to do with confidence anymore. For a moment, I wondered if he would recognize me at all. He did. Ellie? His voice cracked just slightly at the end. He blinked a few times, stunned, like he wasn't sure if I was real or a consequence of bad sleep and regret. I gave a short, polite nod. Hi, Brandon. He walked closer, cautiously, as if I might vanish or slap him or both. Wow, you look different. Great, I mean, really great. Thanks, I said evenly. Do you have a minute? I glanced around. The cafe was quiet. A few laptop warriors scattered across tables. I sighed softly, then gestured to the small table where I'd been standing. A few minutes. He sat down across from me, cradling a chipped mug of black coffee in his hands, like it was the only warm thing left in his life. I've seen you online, he started, voice tentative. Kindling strategy. You've built something incredible. I inclined my head slightly. We've been lucky, and we worked hard. He nodded, eyes dropping to the coffee. You always worked hard. There it was. The ghost of the truth, surfacing too late. I should have seen it sooner, he added. What I was doing, it wasn't right. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He cleared his throat. After everything, they let me go. I bounced around for a while, consulting gigs, a failed startup, nothing stuck. Burned a few bridges I didn't mean to. He looked up, searching my face for something. Pity? Forgiveness? I don't know. But you made something of yourself. I held his gaze calmly. I didn't make something of myself, Brandon. I just stopped letting people take it from me. He looked away. Silence settled between us, soft but heavy. I don't expect anything from you, he said after a moment. I wanted to say I was wrong, about everything. I believed him, not because I wanted to, but because I no longer needed to. I nodded once. Thank you. I stood, slipping my laptop back into my bag. I have a meeting. He looked up again, blinking quickly. Yeah, of course. Ellie? I paused. I hope you're happy. I smiled. Not a smirk, not a dig. A real smile. I am. And I walked out into the soft gray light of the morning. The wind carried the scent of coffee and city rain, and I felt it. That quiet, unmistakable hum of freedom. Not because he'd apologized, not because I'd won, but because I no longer needed the past to mean anything for me to move forward. He was no longer my villain, and I was no longer his shadow. That chapter was over, and I had a whole new book to write.